So in this video, I just want to do an update on these two watches that I have now owned for around 10 months. I do switch between these two watches, but in total, they have been on my wrist around the same amount of time during those 10 months. So this video will just go over the hardware and have a look at how it actually held up during those 10 months. Whenever I wear my watch on my wrist, it is on my wrist 24/7. So sleeping, showering, and of course during the day and all of my activities and so on. I do rarely take them off whenever I need to do something like painting, for instance, or if I need to reach into a certain area where the watch will kind of get in the way. I do take them off occasionally, but it's a very rare thing for me to actually take them off, of course, for charging and also for washing the band. And this video will also kind of talk about this Yooside band that I really like and how well they have actually held up. These are the same bands I use with these watches when they were brand new, and the bands also was brand new back then. So the bands are also reaching the 10-month lifespan. So around 5 months of usage for each of these watches and also for the bands. Right now the Garmin Fenix 7X Pro is on my wrist, and that is because we are starting to get into the spring period here in my country. So we do get a lot more light now. We also have some sunny days, so that's definitely nice. And we are looking forward to getting into the summer month. And that is, in my opinion, where the memory in pixel type display really shines. The reflective surface on the display. Of course, whenever the display is hit by sunlight or any other light, for instance here in my studio, except for all of the glare, of course, because I do have the sapphire versions of both of these watches, so you do get a lot more glare. I've made another video where I go into detail about that. But when you get a lot of light hitting that memory in pixel type display, this is where it really shines, and also it is true always on. I really do still appreciate that. But during the wintertime, I have primarily been wearing my Epix Gen 2 Pro 51mm here in Scandinavia where I live. During the wintertime, it does get very dark, dark around 3 in the afternoon. So the OLED screen is definitely nice there because it does emit light from the display itself. The memory in pixel type display does not do so, only really when you turn on the backlighting. It will emit any kind of lighting, but OLED is of course always emitting light. So that's definitely nicer when you are in a darker environment during wintertime, for instance, or indoors. But it also fares quite well outdoors actually. This screen does get very, very bright. So I've had no real issues in direct sunlight. I still kind of prefer the memory in pixel type of display in summertime, but either one will be fine for me personally. I do kind of like the nicer colors and so on the OLED screen, of course. But the memory in pixel display just have its advantages, of course, battery life, but also always being on. And you also have the solar charging, so you can expand that battery life even further. So let me just remove my 7X Pro and have a look at my wrist first. I've actually worn the watch a little bit higher up my wrist a few days because I was starting to get a rash here where I normally wear my watch. But a week back, it started to itch a little bit. It was getting a little bit on my nerves, so like I said, I moved it up a little bit on my wrist just to get some air here and use some lotion on this part here, and after a few days it got better. Not perfect, but still got better. And I think that is also because during wintertime I do wash my hands frequently, and of course the watch band does get a little bit wet, and of course also for working out and other scenarios where you get sweaty, it will just take a little bit longer for it to actually dry because it is a little bit colder. And you can also see here other parts of my wrist. I have a little bit of a rashy skin, or at least a little bit dry skin here, and also on my knuckles and so on. So my fingers do get very dry during the winter time. So I think that's one of the reasons. I don't think the watch band is the reason or the cause for that. But definitely I recommend washing this watch band frequently. I tend to wash it about once a week. I used to wash it just whenever I took off the watch for charging it. Then I just use some soap and use my fingers to just spread the soap throughout the watch band and then just wash it clean with water until there was no soap left. And just left it off to dry and then put it back on my wrist. I do recommend doing that a little more frequent. Of course, it depends on how much you sweat and how much you exercise and so on and so on and so on. But other than that, I've had no real issues with these bands. You can see here the green one still looks pretty good as well. The only real minor issue I have with these Yooside bands is that the Velcro tends to be a little bit easy to open now on the green one here at least. You can kind of feel that on camera, but it feels a little bit easier to open. It hasn't opened by itself. But from time to time, whenever I put a long sleeve on or bump into something, it can open up halfway like this. Not to the point where the band will actually open up completely, but definitely it does not feel as grippy as it did in the beginning, at least on the Velcro side here. And also the band does tend to, with time, just stretch out a little bit more. So I have to tighten in the band just a little bit more compared to when the band was brand new, but I think that's pretty common with these bands. So that's the only real issue I have with these bands here. Still highly recommend them, very comfortable to use. And like I said, just clean them from time to time and you'll be good to go. So in terms of the watch faces of these watches, I don't know if you can see there, but the titanium one, this is just bare titanium, so it does not have any kind of anodizing on the bezel. But you can see there, there's definitely some noticeable scratches on the bezel. I have dinged this watch into several things, also from time to time, so hard that I was kind of concerned that it will leave a permanent, like, not scratch, but dent or something into the bezel. But there's no, like, dents in the bezel, but there are definitely some scratches and some pretty deep ones there, or pretty noticeable ones there, right by the back label on the bezel. But other than that, I would say that the titanium here has actually held up better than I would have thought in terms of scratches, because there's no coating to scratch off. You would only really notice the scratching on the bare metal. And there's definitely scratches on there. Don't really bother me too much. I really like that fact that it has some patina over time, so you can see that it has actually been used. So it will just add to the overall look, in my opinion, from these bare metal watches. But definitely has held up better than I would have thought or anticipated, considering that it is a matte kind of surface. And matte surfaces usually are very easy to scratch or easy to spot scratches on, compared to like a glossy surface where you see micro scratches only really when you're looking for it. Here it is pretty noticeable. But I would say when I just look at the watch, I don't really notice it at all. I really have to look for it to actually find it. Other than that, the buttons still feel very nice on my samples here. I've had experience with bad buttons on the first generation of the Epix Gen 2. I went through, I believe, 3 of those to get one with buttons that actually worked quite good. But happy to say that on the bigger models, at least on those samples that I have, all the buttons still feels like they were close to brand new. Nice clicky feel, not spongy at all. You do get a satisfying click when you press them, so you're pretty confident that you have actually pressed the button in, and that is the same for both of them. So I'm definitely happy that they have fixed the button issues, at least for the ones I own here. I've been quite unlucky with the smaller variants of the watches. Also, some of the Forerunner watches had bad buttons, in my experience. But the bigger watches, at least the ones I've owned throughout the years, usually have better buttons for some reason. I'm not sure really if it's easier to make bigger buttons or better buttons on a bigger watch, or if there's some other quality control issues going on there, but definitely feels very nice. The white case here on the 7X Pro still looks brand new. No real discoloration. Still looks like, I wouldn't say it was bought yesterday, but there's still no like dings or scratches or deep grooves into the watch case. Of course, the newer design where the bezel will actually extend over the arms that are holding the watch band in place. That also helps quite a lot. So if you bump in here, those parts of the watch, you will hit metal first. You won't hit plastic. That was kind of an issue with the earlier watches, at least the ones I've owned. Pretty much all of them I've had some dings on the arms here that are holding the band in place. But on this one, nothing really. So nothing to complain about. Flashlights on both of them, still fantastic. I use them many times a day. I can't really count how many times I use these flashlights. And one of the nice software updates is that whenever you're activating the flashlight, and that is the same for both of them, you get this little pop-up menu here, or pop-up selector, where you can actually adjust the brightness of the flashlight. And after a few seconds, that will kind of disappear. I wish though that there was some way to like call that back. So if you, for instance, activate the flashlight and you like several seconds later want to adjust the flashlight brightness again, I've not found any way to like pull back that menu. So the only way you can do so is either like disable the flashlight and enable it again, or you could also just go into the menu here and of course select the flashlight menu. Where is it? It's not really a menu I use frequently, so I don't appear to have that menu on my Epix Pro, but it is on my 7X. So I have to go in there and then select the brightness of the flashlight. Again, I wish that side menu was something you could call back, maybe swipe it from the left so it will get back into the screen, but I have not found any ways to actually get that menu back into screen. But other than that, really like that feature. If you know what brightness you want out of the bat, you can just adjust it very easily. Whenever you enable the flashlight, you don't have to go into the quick toggles here and select the flashlight to actually adjust the brightness. Definitely a very welcoming feature. I've just set the back button and the light button. Hold those two at the same time and you'll get into the flashlight menu. I find that that is a pretty easy way to get in there and adjust the brightness, for me at least. So that's also another way of doing it. Just make a shortcut using a 2-button press, or whatever combination you like. I just like the back button and the flashlight button. So that was just a software feature, but anyways, let's just get into more hardware overlook here of the watches itself. So looking at the back side of the watches, of course, the new heart rate sensor, it still functions quite well. One of the better ones out there in my experience, or my opinion, better than the last generation. And also, of course, the previous generation before that, quite a bit better than those. Also for pulse ox or blood oxygen readings, much faster and much more reliable. Heart rate, like I said, much faster and much more reliable. And also for some interval splits and so on, it still feels okay for a novice runner like me. It is fine enough, but definitely if I will be more serious about running, I will use a chest strap for those scenarios. But I think for me personally, I'll be fine with the heart rate sensor on my wrist, just going out for casual runs or those like everyday runs. It will be more than fine for that. In my country, we have not yet been able to activate the EKG functionality. I tried to follow a guide online where you can make the phone think you are in another location by installing an app that could kind of spoof the GPS to thinking you were like in New York, for instance, and then use some kind of VPN service to make Garmin Connect think you were in another country. For some reason, it didn't work for me to activate the EKG, but it's not really a feature that I am super interested in. When it will become available, of course, something I will try out, maybe from time to time, just to see if there's some issues with my heart. But other than that, the backside there looks pretty nice on both of them. Of course, it is protected by your wrist most of the time, at least when you wear the watch. You do have a little more polished surface on the 7X bare titanium here. If it had the same surface on the top, I think we would see scratches more easily. So that's probably why they left it on the bottom side here. And I really like the fact that they use glass on the optical heart rate sensor. Before, I believe it was the Generation 3 sensor. They used plastic, a little plastic bulb over top of that, so that could scratch very easily. And people have complained about it actually breaking or cracking. With time, I've had no issues like that, but still I took more care of those watches when I put them down on my table. Whenever I removed them from my wrist and charged them and so on. These ones I am a little less scared to scratch the surface of that optical heart rate sensor and also to crack the actual glass. So overall, I would say hardware-wise, these watches have held up quite well. The buttons there still look quite nice. Do have a little bit of a ding or scratch on the bare titanium one on one of the buttons, but the anodized one still looks quite fine. Goes for both of them. And of course, the black watch here still also look quite nice. You do see stuff like sweat and so on a little easier on there, salt water or something like that, but you definitely do see that more easily on the black one. You can see the white there near the button. Don't notice that as much on the white one, but other than that, the black also has held up quite well. No real dings or scratches on the plastic part of the watch frame. So that's definitely very nice after 10 months. So one of the things I really like with these watches now is the ability to actually see images you are receiving. That works for both like text messages on the native app on your phone. Let's just get a little bit closer and let me just try and send a text message to myself with an image so you can see the image quality compared between the two. So now you can see the image is being downloaded. Usually it takes a few seconds to download. Seems to be a little bit longer downloading time on the Epix Gen 2, maybe because the image is high resolution, but you can definitely see there the photo quality between the two watches. There's no comparison really. Definitely much better on the OLED screen by far. You can kind of make out what the images is supposed to be. It is me giving it a thumbs up, but other than that, yeah, it's pretty much a complete win for the OLED screen. And that is of course one of the big advantages of that OLED display. It's just so much nicer to look at, also for mapping and so on, much nicer on the OLED screen. But you know, day to day, it don't really bother me that much. But having said that, whenever I switch from my OLED Garmin to my memory and pixel display Garmin, it definitely does take me a few days to get used to the non-OLED screen again. The nice saturated colors and so on. The true black backlighting is just so much nicer. But after a few days, I don't really think too much about that. But having said that, if I only had to pick one watch now after 10 months, I will definitely go with the OLED version. I feel like the shortcomings nowadays with a little bit shorter battery life. Also, the fact that the screen is always emitting light. And the fact that whenever you set your sleep time in Garmin Connect or on the watch itself, it will kind of turn off the screen and you will get this simplified clock screen. You can do the same on the 7X, but the 7X, of course, the screen is always on, but you can see there it does turn off after a few minutes, and it is actually necessary to do so if you wear the watch when you're sleeping, because just this amount of light coming from that OLED screen is quite annoying and quite disturbing if you're trying to sleep. It does still emit quite a substantial amount of light, just in that lower brightness condition. So the fact that it turns off the screen whenever it gets into the sleep mode is a little bit annoying, but I've kind of gotten used to it and learned to live with it. I do have it on the always on screen mode whenever it is not sleeping. I do prefer that. I don't like the raise to wake functionality because you can't really glance at your watch. So you seem more rude whenever you're talking to somebody and you kind of raise your wrist because you just want to see the time. You can't just like glance down at your wrist. And also just during the day, I'm just so used to just glancing at my watch, having to do that gesture and wait that second for it to actually wake up to watch the screen is too annoying for me to live with. I can live with it during the nighttime, but during the day, I do have this screen set to always on. And of course, you lose a little bit in battery life, but I definitely do not have any battery anxiety with the Epix watch. I do have to charge it more frequent than my 7X, but still I can go out with 10% of battery life on my Epix Gen 2 and still have plenty of battery for like a 2-hour hike or something like that. Not something I would do with the Epix Gen 2, the first original smaller variant. But with the big one here, I think it has come to a point where it is definitely acceptable in terms of battery life as well. You do lose out on some battery life, but of course, you can always go to the gesture mode if you want to have more battery life or even more battery life than you have with the always on screen enabled. So yeah, I would go for the Epix Gen 2 if I had to pick today. Only one watch. I am happy though that I own both of these. It is kind of an investment also because I bought them in the start of their life where the price was still pretty high. I did get a pretty okay deal considering they were brand new back then, but the price have come down quite a bit ever since. Now they are pretty reasonable priced in my opinion. So if price is not a concern, then definitely go ahead and get one of each like I do. I still do prefer both technologies, so I'm not really in the camp of wanting to sell like one of the watches and just wear the Epix Gen 2, for instance. And also nowadays Garmin is so smart when selecting the watches and all of the data is synced between the watches. So you don't, for instance, if you're running, you don't have to go out and do the 7-day run before you can actually give you some training advice on your running and so on. Don't really run that much anymore. My asthma is kind of messing with me. You can see my VO2 max is pretty low at the moment. So I just go out from some casual runs, but mainly now I'm just focused on hiking and some cycling, but mainly just to get around here in the city. But hiking is my main goal right now, and these watches are excellent for that as well. So yeah, after 10 months, I would definitely highly recommend either of these watches. I would probably steer you towards the Epix OLED, nice vibrant color screen. But if you know really that memory and pixel display is for you, and also if you want to extend the battery life, and on top of that, the ability to expand the battery life even further if you have a lot of sun, and also appreciate the always on screen and the extra clarity in sunlighting conditions, I'll definitely also still recommend the regular memory and pixel type display Fenix watches. I'm kind of curious to see though, next generation of watches from Garmin, will we still see like the memory and pixel type displays available? Certainly hope so. I'm not really sure how far they can actually push this technology, because it doesn't really seem like a lot of manufacturers are using the memory and pixel displays. You need to manufacture a lot of displays to be able to make the money back from research and development if you wanted to develop further on that platform. So all development right now is on the OLED technology, and maybe even the next generation of vibrant screen technology like micro LED displays and so on. But you know, only time really will tell. But I think OLED will probably be the screen type that most people will go for, because it is definitely much nicer, and you can find it in many ranges from Garmin watches right now. Even like a lot cheaper watches from the Forerunner series have that nice OLED screen, so definitely go that route if you can live with the shortcomings, because the benefit you get is just having that nice screen, because you do spend a lot of time looking at the screen, so why not get the one that looks a little bit better? There's definitely less of a downgrade if you are looking at your phone screen and then looking at your watch screen if you have the Epix Gen 2 Pro or any of the OLED screens from Garmin. Definitely recommend that watch, but both of them are fine. I have definitely not regretted purchasing any of these watches, and I plan to use them into the foreseeable future. Maybe even skip next generation if they don't have anything really in store for me. Only thing I really would like would maybe be a speaker on these watches. Would be kind of nice, the ability to answer phone calls. But then we also get into the smartwatch territory. But if you're carrying something with your hands, it could be quite useful actually to answer phone calls on your watch. So in the beginning here of the second quarter of 2024, I definitely still would recommend either of these watches. But like I said, I will steer you towards the Garmin Epix range or other OLED variant from Garmin. But that's pretty much all I have for this video. I hope to see you again in a future one. Until then, take care.